Today, the service the sermon I'm going to be talking about is the covenant. And I did a thing about the covenant, about when you see the rainbow, how God said he wouldn't destroy the earth again because we have a covenant. He has a covenant with us that he wouldn't destroy the earth again. So when you see the rainbow, that's a sign that God won't destroy the earth. That's what the rainbow represents. But I'm going to go a little deeper into this because I want to sit up here and explain some of the things that you're going through and the covenant that you have with God. I'm talking about people that have a relationship with God. When you have a relationship with God, you're also in covenant with him. It's like a contract that you have with God. Okay. And I'm been reading the Old Testament, and it's so funny because I'm gonna intertwine the Old Testament with us today. And when you read Judges, Numbers, Deuteronomy, go back and you read all those, and every single chapter it talks about the Israelites and all the people that God put, like Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, people that he put in charge of Moses, that he put in charge of the Israelites. And how many times that his covenant with God, their covenant with God kept them going through things. Now, it's so funny because even though they had a covenant with God, okay, and I'm going to explain this a little bit more, the reason why Israel and the Palestinians is what's going on with that. Even though they had a covenant with God, they seen what God did. God brought them through the wilderness. They seen the miracles that God did. And yet and still, every time that God brought them through something, okay, and Moses passed away, or Joshua passed away, or whatever the case, whoever was in charge at that time passed away, they always went back into doing something that they wasn't supposed to do. They always started worshiping other gods or other idols, and then God had to sit up here and let them go through getting captured again, going through slavery again, and I'm talking about 6, 7 years, 10 years. And then they had to ask God for forgiveness, and then God had to forgive them all over again. Because he had a covenant with them. It's so crazy because I don't understand this. Think about this. All the stuff that the Israelites seen God do, and yet and still, every time God delivered them from something, they always went back and did the opposite of what God wanted them to do. Now, it would seem like if you have a covenant with God and he's taking care of you and he's giving you everything that you need, okay, and that you're protected, you don't won over countries and cities and everything else because of God's covering, it seemed like you would follow God. But yet and still, every time that they sit away and got away from God, they wind up going back into their old behaviors. They wind up worshiping other idols and statues and other gods and following other people. And God told them don't marry certain people in different places, and they did it anyway. And then God had to punish them again. And then they had to go through some drama for 5 years, 10 years, how many years. And then they had to sit up here and ask God for forgiveness. And then God wound up forgiving them and sit up here and gave them a new king or a new person to lead them. And this went on through chapter after. If you read the Bible at chapter after chapter, this keeps going on. And it's crazy that it seemed like somewhere along the line, they would have got a hold to this and they would have sit up here and said, you know what? Maybe we should stop following after other gods and other statues and doing what God tell us not to do, and stay with God and walk with God, and pay attention to what God, because when we stay with God, we seem to do good. Okay, but when we get away from God, we wind up being getting back into slavery and back into all this drama and everything else. Things seem to go bad, and they get caught up with people that want to take over the Israelites and everything else. It seemed like they would finally get a hold of this. But yet and still they don't. And I'm going to sit up here and say the same thing when it comes to us. Okay, we do the same thing the Israelites do. God will sit up here, and even though we have a covenant, and I'm talking about Christians now, and I'm talking about people that have a relationship with God, because if you don't have a relationship with God and you don't understand God, it's a whole different ball game. So I'm talking about the people that have a relationship with God, people that know how to trust God, been through something with God. God done brought you out. See, God done brought all of us out of something. I don't care if you have a relationship with God or not. God has brought all of us out of something. But what I want to sit up here and talk about is when you have a relationship with God, and it's so funny because we do the same thing now that they did back in the old days, in the biblical days, and back in the Old Testament. God would deliver us out of something, and yet and still, even though God then deliver us out of something, and we trust God, and we know that if we stay with God, that we might go through a little rough time, whatever the case may be, but we know we have a covenant with God. So we know, because we have a covenant with God, that contract with God, that no matter what goes on, God has got our back. And yet and still, we'll turn around and do something against God, where God has to sit up here and let us go through something, or something. We have to get punished for something. And then we have to sit up here and keep coming back to God and asking God to forgive us. And God does forgive us. And we go through the same thing over and over and over again. It's kind of crazy that the God has me reading the Old Testament, and the Old Testament has a lot to do with what we going on through today. What I'm trying to explain is Israel right now is, and people are getting mad at Israel for what about the Palestinians, about them killing the Palestinians and everything else. And what people don't understand is God, Israel has a covenant with God. Hear what I'm saying? They have a covenant with God, okay? And no matter what goes on, no matter what the Israels do, because they don't always do things the right way too, and they still do things that's not always the right way, and they still do things that's against God sometimes, okay? But they have a covenant with God. So no matter what goes on, and people don't understand, how do Israel get away with certain things? Now, Israel has every right to protect themselves, okay? Because they keep trying to let the Palestinians live, and do their thing. But you can't go over there, and I'm not mad at Israel at all. You can't keep going over there killing their people, and then they don't expect nothing to be done. People don't understand. People sit up here and say, well, Israel's wrong and everything else and whatnot. But God has a system. Okay, and you are not going to sit up here and go against God's system. And God's system is part of Israel. Okay, he has a covenant with Israel. This is why people want to know why United States is connected to Israel. Why is a lot of other places connected to Israel? And I hate to say it, because if you're not connected to Israel, then you better be careful, because when you go against Israel, you going against God's people. And all those going against God's people, which is Israel, okay, you're not going to win that war. God is not going to allow you to sit up here and take over Israel. He's not. He has a covenant with them. It's the same thing when it comes to us. We have a covenant with God. So when Satan comes at us and try to do things against us, or he try to put weapons of form against you or whatnot, it says no weapon shall prosper, because you have a covenant with God. No matter what the situation look like, you are covered by God. You have an agreement with God that as long as you stick with God, God is going to stick with you. The problem is we always want to sit up here and go against God, or do something against God, or sit up here and follow some other kind of crazy stuff. You got people following the scientific stuff, the Scientology or Buddha and all this other stuff instead of following God. And God is a jealous God. He is not going to allow you to sit up here and follow another God, another a statue and everything else and whatnot, and you're going to be protected. It happened same thing with Israel. And back in the days, every time they went out and try to go against God, okay, they always wind up getting captured into another being slave in somewhere else or whatever the case may be. And we are following the same path. We do the same things. We go against God instead of us sticking with God, no matter what. Because he's brought us through so much and he showed us so much, we keep going against God. And as long as we keep going against God, you know, we always going to have to suffer some kind of consequences. But you know the amazing thing about God, even though we go against him, God is so good that he has a covenant with us, that as long as we keep that covenant with God, he always bring us through. So when people are coming at you and they giving you a hard time and you don't get that promotion and that job and whatnot, you understand me? Don't worry about it. As long as you stick with God and as long as you have that covenant with God, no matter what people try to come against you at, it is not going to happen. Just like the Israelites, no matter what people come against them at, it's not going to work against them because they have a covenant with God. It's the same thing with us. When we have a covenant with God, no matter what people do against you, it's not going to work. Stop worrying about what people are doing to you. Stop worrying about that job having to giving you a hard time and you're not getting a promotion. Stop worrying about people talking about you and everything else and whatnot. God will protect you. God says vengeance is his. He will cover everything that has to be covered when you have a covenant with him. That's why it's so important for you to have a relationship with God, because we're so entwined with the old system, that our system is so entwined with the old system that we operate almost in the same way. And so God has given me, you know, this thing about the covenant. We have a covenant with God. When you walk with God, when you talk with God, even though you may make mistakes and everything else and whatnot, God always accepts you back as long as you have that covenant with him. As long as you keep God first, he always keep that covenant with you. God don't break the covenant with you. You break the covenant with him. So I just want to talk about this covenant because it's so important. This covenant is so important. And that's why I said you need to read your word. Go back into and read Numbers and Judges and all these things and whatnot, and you'll see the Deuteronomy, and you'll see the things that the Israelites did. But God, even though they screwed up and whatnot, God always kept their covenant. He's the same thing he's doing with Israel, and the same thing he does with us. So, Father, thank you for this message about your covenant, because it's so important for us to know that even though we screw up and we mess up, we have a covenant with you that keeps us where you are. It keeps you with us no matter what goes on. It says, let no weapon form against us prosper, as long as you have that covenant with you. So, Father, I thank you for this message that you gave me on covenant, and I hope I explained it right so people can understand that the covenant is so important, that it goes back all the way back into biblical times, back into the old times and whatnot. And when you read your word, you will understand what the covenant means. So, Father, thank you for this word and this message. In Jesus' name, I thank you and pray. Amen.